Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are very thankful for the time that we have once again this week as we study. Each morning, we ask, Lord, for your guidance. Help us to sort through all the rubble and the mess that has been placed over your truths, and help us to discern things that are significant prophetically as we look at the past history of the United States and as of its military. And we just pray, Lord, that you can be our teacher. May your Holy Spirit speak to our hearts and bring a conviction of sin and also strength and power to overcome. Be with each person, we pray, and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. Now, to sort of put things into context, what we're doing this morning is we looked at these civil wars and the early history of the United States, both in and not in great detail, but relating to the Revolutionary Wars and the Civil War, particularly regarding the Thanksgivings. And what came up had to do with the rise of the United States in 1798. And of course, this is a significant waymark. It's the time of the end. And we have some specific dates regarding that. Pope Pius VI, when he was taken prisoner by General Berthier. And then also Dwight noticed, because we were talking about the Marines, the connection of the Marines to this history, to the history of the American Revolution. So a couple of things that I noticed. Now, I'm going to bring up Dwight's paper here. So it's not like a completed paper. It's something he threw together really quickly. And but there are some points that he brings up. So I'll share the screen here. So this he did is like a letter to me. So one corrective thing that he wanted to point out, it was, it looks like it's taking a bit there to share, okay. That it wasn't the Marines that killed Osama bin Laden, it was SEAL Team 6. So, and he just mentions here that there are special US military units, the Green Berets, the SEALs, US Marine Corps, Delta Force, US Army, US Navy. So again, I don't know much about the American military. I'm not sure what the Green Berets are.
Well, the Green Berets are they're a very specialized unit sent to do some of the toughest jobs that the Army will face. The SEALs are a highly trained unit. Basically, they are sent in, especially, well, like Delta Force, they're sent in when the US government wants something taken care of, but they don't want to have the oversight. They don't want to get their hands dirty. The comment that's made a lot is that the SEALs or the Delta Force can be sent in to do what some would call wet work when someone has to be killed,
yeah,
or other jobs that may not be completely legal under United States law.
It just seems kind of strange that they have these types of forces that will do illegal things, but I mean, I don't quite understand it. Now you mentioned something here which I read up on, was the posse comitatus.
Right.
And you said we need to address this sometime in the future, in the near future, which it seems to me that this is that anybody can be made, can basically be conscripted or whatever just on the spot, be given either in the sense of they can become part of the army. They're just on the spot. They don't have to go through all the training. What would be the significance of this in your mind?
Well, there was a law passed in 1878
Yeah,
that allows the US president to basically enforce posse comitatus for use against the American people.
now, yeah, so some of this there was actually two aspects to it. The first aspect really didn't have to do with conscripting people into the army on the spot. It had to do with limitations of what roles the army can take in domestic affairs. Something to that effect.
There's some that, yeah, not just the army, but any of the regular forces.
Well, some of the forces aren't included in this because they really aren't land forces. So originally it was just the army, then it was the Air Force was included, but they don't. The Navy isn't included in this law because the Navy wouldn't have any role on land. So it's kind of a strange. I'm not sure what the significance of it is as far as prophetically.
Okay, the situation, and here again, here is a law that is on the books and has been on the books of the United States since 1878.
Yeah, and they've updated it in 1956, and I can't remember the last time.
I believe it was 47, 56.
In 2017 or something, or maybe it was in the 2000s.
Right.
I can't remember which year. Maybe it was 2015.
Now, part of this situation is that there are those that made note that they seem to have made use of Delta Force at the time of the incursion in Waco.
No.
So that wouldn't surprise me. There's the comments that were being made was that there was at least 3 members of Delta Force that were at Waco. There may have been as many as 20.
Yeah, so they wouldn't be, I mean, they wouldn't be restricted by this posse comitatus.
Well, they were actually sent in because here again, we had a president at that time that didn't really want to know what steps these people were going to take.
Mhm.
This was being done in US territory. This was being done against US citizens.
Mhm.
And as we have discussed, I mean, the situation in Waco was more or less precipitated because someone within the General Conference made a call to people and wound up speaking with the basically the head legal for the United States, Janet Reno, at that time.
Mhm.
And they felt that what was happening in Waco was possibly going to lead to an armed insurrection.
Mhm.
So,
Okay. Well, thanks for that.
sure.
Now, of course, the U.S. Marine Corps has an interesting history. Now, you bring up in your paper here that General Berthier is either taken captive February 10th or February 15th.
The Berthier takes the Pope captive
Yeah,
either February 10th or 15th.
Yeah. Why would you say the 10th? What? Because it's pretty clear it's on the 15th. And all the records I've seen is he's captured on the 15th. So
I'm reading in several other sources.
okay, yeah, because I mean, there are events that happen on the 10th, but they wouldn't be the Pope being taken captive. So, because I've had other people bring this up And every time I look at the documentation, his capture, which is the point of which we're marking this, is he's physically taken captive on the 15th of February.
Well, the thing that again here was interesting for me when I'm looking at this.
Yeah.
When I'm looking at the day in which the Marine Corps was founded,
Mhm.
which was 11th July of 1798. That is, I mean, if we follow with the 10th of February date, that's 151 days later the Marine Corps is founded. And if you follow with the 15th of February, that's 146 days.
Mhm.
Now, the 10th of February, 1798 was a Sabbath. The 15th was a Thursday, preparation, or just before Preparation Day.
Okay. Okay, interesting. Now, so one of the things we know that Pope Pius became Pope on February 15th, 1775.
Right.
So, which I find interesting, so that his capture is going to be exactly 23 years to the day from when he's made Pope. And so 23 years is 100th of 2,300 years. Now, February 15th is the 46th day of the year. And you're going to have 46 years follow from the time of the end to 1844.
Okay, now is there any relevance to that being the 146 days after the founding of the Marine Corps?
Yes. Well, what you have here is the Marine Corps first is formed in 1775 on June 10th.
Right.
So you got the 1775 date, both for the Pope Pius becoming the Pope, and also for the start of the Marine Corps. But there's going to be this official date, because in a sense it's kind of disbanded for a short time. And then on July 11, 1798, it officially becomes the US Marine Corps. So there's just some interesting history in connection with the Marine Corps and its formation, and Pope Pius himself. So I thought that was significant.
Now, as we were looking at this, you said that and I'm just going to restate that Pope Pius VI was elected or took his throne on February 15th of 1775, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in other words, it's 23 years later that Berthier takes him captive.
Right. And so that would be 100th of 2,300 days, which ends in 1844. But it's pointing to that 2,300 days. And
right.
The 46 days would then point to those 46 years to the end of the 2,300 years. So it just seems to me that his period of time when he's taken captive, that date has this symbolic representation. And I've dealt with this in the past, which is why I know this. So there was, I'm trying to remember, I did have a chart with it. Yeah, so the interesting thing had to do with, here, I'll show you this. Because the date that's important here is November 15th in 1798. And anybody know what that is? Because I don't remember.
I'm not quickly recalling it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I just have a chart, but I can't remember what event that was. So anyway, I'd made a chart. The thing about November 15th is it's 46 days from the end of the year. So there was some significance in this, and I can't remember right now. And I thought I would have it in my chart the information, but I made a chart without any information other than the date. So what was the significance of November 15th? I can't remember now. No, that's it. So all I have is November 15th. Because November 15th in 1798, or maybe it's not in 1798, maybe it's, I'm gonna have to think about that. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, it's 46 days. So November 15th and February 15th are connected in that they're both 46 days from the beginning and the end of the year. In 1798, something happens, I believe, on November 15th in 1798.
Was November 15 connected with the Week of Christ study?
Yes, it is, but it's connected with lots of things. But I can't remember particularly in 1798 what it was connected with.
Right, okay.
So, right, so yeah, I mean, I could go into the whole thing about November 15th. Because November 15th in 2019 was exactly 25-20 days from the Mayan calendar from the 13th back to, right? And so it was 25-20 days from when Heidi and I first met. So it was our 25-20 anniversary. And it was basically a week if you counted, depends how you count, but from November 9th. So if you counted from November 9th to November 15th, it's 7 complete days from the beginning of November 9th to the end of November 15th, 2019. And so I'd marked that in 2019. So, but there was a significance in 1798 as well. And so 1798, something about 1798 that represented that period from 1798 to 1844. And so this new idea here that I'm adding to it, so I know not everybody's all familiar with all these things, because I can't even remember all of them, is that we can take Pope Pius and we can connect him to the US Marine Corps in that the period of time from when the US Marine Corps first is formed, which is June 10th, 1775. They're going to then become an officially the US Marine Corps in July 11th, 1798. So that's going to be, again, 23 years. And in this case, an extra 29 days. But the fact that the Pope is taken captive. When does the Pope die? That's going to be like August something or July something. What is that? Yeah, that's going to be August. When the Pope,
August
29?
August 29, yes.
That's it, August 29, yeah, and that's going to be, so that's not connected. And that's going to be 1799.
So it's actually 555 days from,
Okay.
I think, February 10, when Berthier enters Rome.
Okay. Yeah, because yeah, he enters Rome on the 10th. And then he takes the Pope captive on the 15th. So it takes 5 days till the Pope is taken captive. Yeah, or 550 days from when the Pope is taken captive. If we're going to count it that way. So I think there's some interesting things here, just as far as the chronology. Now, the next part of this has to do with the war against Islam. So this becomes, I think, really the significant part of this. Now, so I don't know how much of this to actually read, but we're going to have this. There's some treaties that are going to be signed. The issue, Dwight, if you want to kind of sum up the issue of what was happening with the Barbary Coast here.
Well, the traditional way that things had been handled is that whenever there was a change of administration, whether that meant a different king, whether that meant a different queen or a different president. The beys of, or pashas of these little areas believed that they should be honored with a major gift. Now, where America is very different from the ruling families of Europe, we hold an election every 4 years. And sometimes it means every 4 years we have a different president, sometimes every 8.
Yeah.
So when Jefferson was inaugurated in 1801, and Thomas Jefferson had served this country in many capacities from 1776 onward. But when he was elected president in 1801, the Pasha of Tripoli demanded almost $250,000, which would be about right now like $3.5 million from the new administration. Now, since at that point that represented a major amount of money out of the United States budget, which their revenues at that time were only $10 million, Jefferson was not in favor of paying out this, even if it was under an existing treaty. So he refuses the demand. And since this was not paid according to the treaty that was signed in 1796, then this Pasha declares the US.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't any formal written document, but
they cutting down the flagstaff in front of the US consulate.
Right.
Okay. And it's kind of interesting, sorry to interrupt there, but it's kind of interesting because I'm just looking at a map. So this Barbary Coast is basically where you have the entrance into from the Atlantic Ocean into the Mediterranean. So it's that little bit at the beginning there, and the name of that place always escapes me. Right at the mouth of there, what's the name of that city that's there?
Gibraltar.
Yeah, Gibraltar. Yeah. So that's, yeah, the Gate of Gibraltar or whatever that you have there. So that's the Barbary Coast. And I mean, I've heard this term before, but you know, you never really know where that is. Now the people there, this is like Algiers and countries like that. So this is the area, it's called Barbary. So these would be Islamic peoples that basically they're pirates, and they're going against all these ships, and there's these issues here. So there's kind of, I don't know, is there kind of like a protection racket going on there too as well? Is that sort of the idea?
Pretty much.
Okay. So that's what this money is paid for. We're basically going to leave your ships alone if you pay us this money.
Yep.
Okay.
They see what the racket was is that if a specific power sends ships into that area,
yeah,
Barbary pirates would attack those ships, and any people that they took alive from those ships became slaves.
Okay.
So they would take any cargo that they could. They would take any of the people, and if they were able to capture the ship, they would also take the ship and use it as one of their own.
Okay. So by paying this money, they're just it's just making it easier for everyone. But the U.S. doesn't want to do this.
Right, because of the amount of money that they seem to think that they're due.
Yeah. And so Tripoli is in Libya, and it's along this coast. So there, it's the capital of Barbary.
Right.
That time. Now it's
So,
presently Libya. Okay.
So Jefferson doesn't know that they have decided to declare war. So he sends a small squadron, and that's 3 frigates and 1 schooner,
Mhm.
under the command of Commodore Richard Dale, with gifts and letters to attempt to maintain the peace.
Mhm.
But in the event that the war was declared, Dale was instructed to protect American ships and citizens against potential aggression.
Mhm.
So Jefferson attempted to state that he was unauthorized by the Constitution, without the sanction of Congress,
Mhm.
to go beyond the line of defense. he tells Congress, I communicate to you all material information on this subject, that in the exercise of this important function confided by the Constitution to the legislature exclusively, their judgment may form itself on a knowledge and consideration of every circumstance of weight. Although Congress never voted on a formal declaration of war, as it is supposed to, it authorized the president to instruct the commanders of armed American vessels to seize all vessels and goods of the Pasha of Tripoli, and also to cause to be done all such other acts of precaution or hostility as the state of war will justify.
Yeah.
Here,
And so we see also Sweden's at war with that, with Tripoli since
correct.
1800. So they're joining together, and so and so there's a lot going on here, but I mean, one of the main points is that this is America's first war, naval war, where they're going to go onto another country's land, basically, right?
Into another country's area, yes.
Area. So because they're going to go on land, there's actually a war, the war of I can't think of the name. It starts with a D, Derna or something like that.
Derna comes up here in a bit, yes.
Yeah, the Battle of Derna, which is an interesting, the whole thing connected with that. So you got this King Ferdinand IV, King of Naples. His kingdom was at war with Napoleon, but Ferdinand supplied the Americans with manpower, craftsmen, supplies, gunboats, motorboats. So it's kind of interesting what happens here. I mean, this is a part of American history that just I never knew about. So other than, probably there's been movies where they refer to this kind of stuff, but, as a kid, you don't have a context to understand this. So there's a one-sided battle on August 1st, 1801. So it was kind of interesting because yesterday was August 1st when I was reading this. Any other points just from what we passed there that needs to be noted?
Yeah, no.
Okay. So so they're going to end up being mentioned some of these different ships. So February 16th, 1804, the U.S. Marines aboard the captured Tripolitan ketch rechristened the USS Intrepid, thus deceiving the guards on Philadelphia to float close enough to board her. So just talking about some of the battle things, some of the dates. And then we get to the Battle of Derna, and this is April to May of 1805. So the U.S. Marine Corps First Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon led with a force of 8 U.S. Marines and 500 mercenaries, Greeks and Arabs and so forth from different areas. So this is the first time the United States flag was raised in victory on foreign soil. The action is memorialized in a line in the Marines' hymn, The Shores of Tripoli. The capturing of the city gave American negotiators leverage in securing the return of hostages and the end of the war. So that becomes an interesting battle. I read quite a bit about the Battle of Derna, where they were at the different dates and so forth. And it sort of starts they say April 27th, but it's really April 26th, really the day before that the actions start in initiating this war. So I thought that was an interesting date because it's the 26th day of the 4th month. So we have Islam connected with the United States attacking Islam on the 26th day of the 4th month on the Gregorian calendar.
I was finding it interesting.
Yeah.
That the Marine Corps was founded on biblically what we would call the 26th day of the 3rd month. And the treaty ending the conflict in Derna was signed on the 11th day of the 3rd month of a biblical year, almost exactly 7 years later.
Yeah. Yeah, which is interesting. I mean, there's lots of dates here and different significances that we could look at this. So yeah, we got the Battle of Derna is on the 4th day of the 3rd month that it concludes, and then the 11th day of the 3rd month we have there June 10th, 1805. Now, so it's June 10th, 1775, that the Marine Corps first is organized. So that's going to be 30 years to the day that treaty is signed from when they begin. And within 7 years of papacy falling to Napoleon, Ottoman Empire loses to America. In the future, US military becomes the army of the King of the North. So this is, I mean, this goes back a little bit to what we were looking at in Millerite history, because this history to them is, is really much contemporary events. I mean, if you're dealing with people writing in the 1830s and 1840s, all of this that's happening in regard to Islam and Turkey and all these different battles going on in these different parts of the Mediterranean, to them, they're seeing these as fulfillments of prophecy, but they're not interpreting them correctly. That is, they don't have enough information to understand the significance of all of these dates and how they're connected to the end time. So, and I tried to figure out, how can we look at this? And the only thing, one of the things that this movement has been looking at, and this would have happened back in, I believe it would have been in 2014, in December of 2014. I'm trying to think it was December of 2014. I'm pretty sure it was, that Jeff was in Wales, and he also went to Austria, I believe. And I think it was then. And when he came back from this trip, watching the videos, he was talking about how we're going to be making a prediction regarding Islam. So I don't remember all the reasoning, but there was this idea in 2015 that we were going to be making this prediction. So when Jeff came to Alberta in 2015, and also Mark Bruce, I think it was then. I'm trying to remember if Mark Bruce came in 2014 or 2015. I think Mark Bruce came in 2014, but it was in 2015 that Jeff was talking about this. Yes, because he was telling me that Mark Bruce is the one, he wants to make this prediction, right? And because I was telling Jeff, well, this is interesting and I have some ideas what this might mean. So he said, oh, you're like Mark Bruce, you want to make this prediction? I said, no, not really. I just had some ideas. But at that time, there was lots we did not know. So we really hadn't sorted out the lines. We had just in 2014 come up with the symbol of the Midnight Cry in placing it on August 15th. 1844. And it's not going to be until the end of 2015 that we start to, and into 2016, that we get this symbol of midnight. But even then, we're not placing these things. I mean, we're giving the dates for them in Millerite history, but we're not understanding where they fit within our lines. So one of the problems that we have, and because you make this note here, France is the king of the South at that time, joins with Russia, which will become the king of the South in our time, to defeat Islam within 29 years after the fall of the papacy. So one is we have this, this period of time where France is the king of the South. And we're going to have this period of time when the Soviet Union falls, and we're going to be making predictions regarding the king of the South again, right? So Raphia. So let's talk about this idea. What do we think? Because people ask me this, where is Raphia? What is Raphia? How are we understanding Islam in our time? Because to me, it seems like we haven't sort of anchored down what we understand about Raphia and Panium, where they're fulfilled. So I don't know if anybody has any ideas or any thoughts, because it's kind of a disjointed study here at this point. But when we look back here and we see what was happening with Islam, we know that Islam has this part to play. The question is, what part does Islam play? And our position is that Islam is protecting God's people prior to a Sunday law. So any thoughts on this?
One of the things that I was looking at with all of this is that when we're looking at the different nations that went up against Islam and their implications and their importance to us today.
Britain, France, Russia.
Well, I'm speaking primarily France and Russia.
Yeah. Okay.
That first, we have the Marines that have now gone in against Islam. Now Islam is going to come up against France and Russia combined during the Greek War of Independence. And then when the Russo-Turkish War begins, they're coming up against Russia alone. So here's the torch, in a manner of speaking, being passed from one king of the South to another.
Right. So France is now passed the torch to Russia.
Right.
Even in that history. Because, that's because one of the questions I guess we could even ask is, we know that France is the king of the South in 1798. But the question always is when does it cease to be the king of the South, and when does Russia become the king of the South?
Well,
now Russia still at this time is, like it's a while. So it's after obviously the Russian Revolution, that they're really going to become atheists, because they're in 1828 they're still Orthodox.
Right.
So we can't really say they become the king of the South then, but they're going to begin this transition. And part of it is in this battle with the Ottoman Empire.
Well, it's interesting because within 20 years of the Russo-Turkish War, you have the publication of Marx's Communist Manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
So the seeds were being sown in Europe for the communist evolution.
Yeah, see, and it's interesting because I've read Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, so they're Russian authors.
Right.
They're writing near the end of the 1800s. So you get the hint of these things being referenced, the Russian-Turkish war, because you have these old men who had fought in this war, who'd been generals and so forth, that are some of the characters, right? So definitely there's this reference to Islam, but it's just part of the culture that has happened, right? So this history exists, and you're looking at that time as this transition to what's going to be the Russian Revolution, and they do inherit it from France. So one of the things you see in this Russian literature is that to act sophisticated or be cultured, you need to know some French. And so you'll see in this conversation, they'll be talking, and all of a sudden somebody will say something in French. And this is all just a pretense of looking cultured, because the Russians really admired the French. And I used to work at a hospital, and there's this old Russian lady who had come to Canada prior to the revolution. And she just loved the French. And she says, oh, Russians love the French. The two best languages in the world are Russian and French. And she taught me some Russian, which I don't really remember now. But the whole thing about it is that the Russians inherited this French Revolution partly because of their love of French culture. But both of those cultures are very licentious as well. Right. So that, I'm not sure why particularly, whether that has something to do with Catholicism, whether it's the Orthodox branch of it or the Roman branch of it, that differs from the Protestant world. But that adoption both of atheism and that licentious culture really are part of being the king of the South. And France and Russia both have these characteristics. So there's something there. So we have, anyway, Islam. So trying to sort this out, because the question still is, when we look at Rafi and Panium, we thought we had very specific understanding of what was going to happen. And this was dealing with the prophecy of Balaam. So we were going to, and connected with Daniel 11. So first it had started with the prophecy of Balaam. That's actually where we got this idea of the two strikes of Islam. And then they got connected to the symbols of midnight and the midnight cry. And this is something we're going to examine more as we get to that part of the history of the foundation of this message, is how we came about with those predictions. But we then placed at least Raphia on November 9th. And that was primarily Parminder and Tess taking that because we had Raphia already as a symbol, but they're now going to give it a date. Now, can we say that Raphia was fulfilled on November 9th?
I know that there are those that would say it.
Right.
I don't know that we can.
Yeah, and I don't think that we can, based on what we predicted. So this is part of the problem in this movement as well, in that we don't really know what we do with Rafi and Panium. Now, part of the thing that was happening in December 6th of 2020, when that declaration was written by those in control of FFA, is that we were studying at that time Daniel chapter 11, verse 1 to 4. And we were starting to examine this whole thing of the last president. And of course, that would be connected with our ideas of Daniel 11, dealing with Rafi and Panium. But those studies were really shut down. I mean, December 6th, I just thought we were going to go online in the morning and we'd have the study, and I find the study's not happening. So, and also that I'm shut out then of the WhatsApp group. I can't even, find how to sign in, I think, is the problem. So So we have this understanding of Rafi and Peniel, and this has to do with Islam. But can we go back to this history and learn anything about that from this history connected with 1798 and the Marines? Is there something that we're missing in this history? Because remember, part of this history is the interpretation of Daniel chapter 11, basically from is it 31 to 46? So where they're dealing with I can't remember the verse, how it goes. And part of this is that we really have to, so that's in verse 36, and the king shall do according to his will. So it's in verse 36. So in verse 36, you're going to have this idea that this king that's going to do according to his own will is France, not the king of the north or the papacy. So that was the way that they understood it then. Now, if we go back to their history and what they're looking at their contemporary history dealing with Islam, and they're going to make some predictions, and they're going to be correct. So they're going to make this date August 11th, 1840, and it's going to come about as they predict to some degree. But later on, Lich is going to abandon his understanding of Revelation 9, and he's going to do so because in his mind, the prediction didn't come to pass. That is, initially he believed it had, but the results that they thought would occur from the submission of basically Turkey to the four European powers would just result quickly in the end of Turkey, but it didn't. It has to go on until the 1920s. So what does that tell us? I mean, that's, I know I'm not asking very good questions, but if we look back at this history, we can see that they're looking at contemporary events. We can look at those and we can see that they're connected to the rise of the United States, that Islam comes into this history. But what mistake are we making, or what mistake have we made in regard to our predictions regarding Islam? What is the error that we've made, I guess is the question. Because God was leading us. We can see that clearly. We're told that we're going to be making a prediction regarding Islam. And then we end up with a chronology that appears to give us these dates, November 9th and July 18th, that Islam should fulfill. And yet none of those events happen as we predicted. So what's the mistake that we made? What's the problem?
Well, if we look at this chiastically,
Yeah.
we have Russia being involved against Islam from the early set on. But when we come down to 1830, when France invades Algiers and ends 313 years of Turkish rule, we have France that had joined in the Battle of Navarino, did not join in the Russo-Turkish War, but then comes back on the scene to go back up against Islam. So my question, if we took this chiastically, is it possible that with everything that we had been looking at, that we had missed the point as to the involvement and whose involvement was going to be important for our time? Is there something that needs to occur that involves the current king of the South, Russia, before Islam becomes involved again?
Yeah, so that's the question. Now, one of the things that I notice, like I really like Daniel van der Horst's study on the chronology and the dates. because I think he's correct. The only problem that I would have is his speculation about these events. It's like we're still tied into, well, we're waiting for an event that's somehow going to make us correct about what we were doing. So we're going to have, maybe there would be this empowerment on August 11th that'll be connected with August 13th. And I think that we're still making the same mistake by doing that. That is, we need to really try to understand what our mistake is. So, for instance, a lot of us are holding to, well, we accept July 18th was correct. But I don't think that that's enough. Because in Millerite history, there were many people who accepted that the 7th month movement was correct, but they went off in different directions. So obviously you had the larger group just rejecting it completely, but you still had people like Samuel Snow holding on to that date. So he wasn't dismissing October 22nd. He still held on to it, as far as I know, till the end. But he had a completely different interpretation of what they had done wrong, if anything. And this is the thing, that there was a group that came to understand correctly what October 22nd meant and where they had gone wrong. And I would think that the same has to be true today, that we're going to have some people still holding to July 18th who are going to be in error, and some people holding to July 18th who are going to be corrected. And the question is, as a movement, how are we going to sort this out? Now, we know that we're studying right now, by examining the past, that's going to be the best thing that we can do. So my argument against people who aren't doing what we're doing is that they're in danger, because they continue to look at what's happening around them in the world, in the news and so forth, and trying to interpret it based upon ideas that they have that are wrong, and they're not willing to be corrected. And the only way we can be corrected is by the past. And if you look at Ellen White, what she's doing, what is James White doing in 1850? What is Ellen White saying that God has James White to do that's going to put them on the right track?
Publish the studies and the words of those that have gone before us.
Right. So you're going to publish the work of the pioneers. They're going to republish things that were written from 1840 to 1844. And that's what's going to keep them on the right track. It's going to be what's going to correct them. And this is what we're trying to do. You know, and I pray that we're doing the right thing in how we're approaching this, because this is very serious. And this is my concern about some of the things that I see that people are doing that I would call speculative, is that if we're not anchored solidly on the foundation, we can easily be misled by the things around us, by the distractions that Satan has put in front of us. And, you know, so I'm not a person who's going to try to stop people from looking at things, because we do need to, but we always have to anchor them in the past. And we have to be corrected. I mean, it seems to me that there is a correction that's needed, and that correction comes from the past by looking at the foundation and by looking at this history again and seeing things that we never saw. One is, we see that there's a vindication of this movement in the chronology of the past. But we also have to be careful that we're looking at the past correctly. So, you know, so one thing is, we have a period of 30 years that we could sort of connect with this as well, from 1775 to 1805, right? From the start of the American Revolution.
Right.
And also from the time that Pope Pius VI is made Pope, to these battles that happen regarding Islam, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at. We're looking at here at 1805. So that's going to be 30 years. And now we also have 30 years in our history. And is it correct to look at these two periods of 30 years?
Why wouldn't it be?
Yeah, because I don't think they're just arbitrary periods. You know, to talk about the American Revolution and then to talk about its battle with Islam, and then this treaty in 1805, I don't think that would be insignificant. America now, in 1798, you're going to have the Marines rise. They're going to be officially the U.S. Marines. And now they're going to be involved in this battle. And it's going to be America's first victory on foreign soil. So now we also know in our history at the end that we have these wars and these battles that are connected with Islam that mark the time of the end. Now, one of the things we know that in 1979, what happens? 10 years prior to 1989.
Russia invades Afghanistan.
Yeah, which really affects the Russian Olympics. That's why I remember it. Because I was just young then, teenager. So we have this this invasion of Afghanistan, which is a conflict that really continues on and is instrumental in what happens at 9/11 as well. Right?
Right.
And so Russia gets involved in this invasion, and then America is going to be involved. So this becomes this proxy war, so to speak, they talk about. Now, in 1989, can we say that what's happening with Islam there is connected with what happens in 1989?
Well, by 1989, wasn't the war in Afghanistan being seen as pretty much a loss for Russia?
Right. But why are the Pope and Reagan, what is it that about the Afghan war that caused them to take the actions they do in overthrowing Russia? Or is it connected? Is what's happening in Afghanistan connected with what people see as the threat of Russia?
I always thought that it was.
Yeah, but what specifically? Why would this war in Afghanistan matter? From it's just Afghanistan. Who cares, right? You understand what I'm saying? But they do care. America cares, and the papacy cares. And now we can say that this has to do a lot with the belief of the Catholic Church and the belief of the United States regarding communism. But the Catholic Church is actually really communistic.
Right.
So that's not really what the Catholic Church is concerned about. So what are they concerned about? Like, just even in the news, or what would the world say that is the concern about this Afghan war?
Wasn't it along the lines that they didn't want to see the communist aggression continue in that part of the world? Communist expansion, they wanted to put an end to it.
Yeah, okay. So, but, Russia's not going to be very successful in this war anyway. Right? Just like the United States is not going to be successful really in Afghanistan. I mean, maybe the United States did a bit better than Russia, but it's a pretty difficult battle to fight. Afghanistan is not a country that really is fun to have a battle in, to have wars in, especially a long, prolonged war. So I don't know if we fully understand it. I mean, obviously we know that this became a central issue. Now, this war, it's kind of interesting. It began December 24th, 1979, and it ended February 15th, 1989. 9 years, 1 month, 3 weeks, and 1 day. So this is just according to Wikipedia, just looking at this Soviet-Afghan war.
But, okay, February 15th,
Yeah,
could we tie that back with the Pope
mhm.
being taken?
I think we would have to. And also the December 24th, 1979 date, because when does the Soviet Union fall?
December 25th, 1991.
So what
But that
happens?
25th, that
Yeah,
25th of December in 1979, I think the troops actually enter Afghanistan on the 25th.
on the
I
25th,
think
right?
yes,
Okay.
I think Brezhnev actually makes the decision on the 24th or something for
Okay.
the war, or
Yeah.
sort of commences it that way.
Mhm.
So you get some sources will give you the 25th. I know Wikipedia gives you the 24th,
Yeah,
but other
depends how
sources
you
will give you
count.
the 25th.
Yeah, so some people, and that's what I was saying, even with that, the battle there of Derna. I mean, if you really look at it, I would say it's the 26th of April, not the 27th. Just because it just depends. So it's not always a clear-cut thing. How do you decide when the military action begins or is initiated? Do you do when there's a declaration of war? All these types of things. There's different ways in which people count these dates, and you can see even in the Bible where they have the two different dates for the fall of Jerusalem, or the destruction of Jerusalem. One is the 7th day of the 5th month, the other one's the 10th day of the 5th month. So it depends what you're counting. Are you counting the destruction of the temple itself, or are you counting when they enter into the city? So, but anyway, my point was in 1991, there's actually two different dates you can use for the fall of the Soviet Union. You can use December 24th or 25th. Because what happens on December 24th, 1991?
I don't recall.
Okay, so Gorbachev is going to, I think Gorbachev resigns on the 24th, and no, he resigns the next day, but the USSR actually ends on the 24th. So it's dissolved on the 24th. And then the next day, Gorbachev resigns. So actually those two dates are together, the 24th and the 25th. So he was a president without a country for 1 day, if that makes sense. So that's why I think it's significant that we can look at something like this war. Now, this is going to be 10 years before the Berlin Wall falls, but we tie that event, the fall of the Berlin Wall, with what happens in 1991, by that 777 days. So I would say that this Afghan war, beginning December 24th to 25th, 1979, and ending February 15th, 1989, gives us these dates that tie us back to 1798, and also bring us forward to our time as well. Am I making a stretch there?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think that I am, but that's my opinion about what I think. Now, so you have some things in your notes here. 1830, France invades Algiers, ending 313 years of Turkish rule. France versus the Ottoman Empire. So you have 3 times the King of South, then current and future, defeats Islam. 3 external defeats for Ottoman Empire within 32 years of the papacy taken captive.
One of the points that I noted earlier in that document was by 1834, the Marine Corps were placed under the authority of the US Navy.
Okay,
So we're talking about a period of 36 years
okay,
in this portion of the Marines incarnation.
yeah,
So if we add to that from 1775 to 1798, we're dealing with a period of 59 years overall.
mhm.
So I don't know if that has any implication or not with what we're addressing.
Yeah, I don't know. The only thing I can say about the Russo-Turkish War, it begins on April 26th. So again, that's a symbol for Islam. But in this case, it's Islam being attacked, just like the Battle of Derna, which I mark as April 26th, 1805. Now you have Russia coming against Turkey. So another battle against Islam. And this one's
Well,
starting also on April 26th,
okay, but
in 1828.
okay, but that's the other part that's intriguing about that is that's 23 years from the Battle of Derna, right?
Yeah,
Okay, so you had Pope Pius on his throne for 23 years.
mhm,
23 not only is a symbol of the 2300 days, but is half of the how do we say this? The
46.
46, right?
So the two 23s together make 46, the 46.
Right. And 46 chromosomes is that of a man.
Yeah. So we have this symbol of 23 and 46
Right.
in connection with this. So I think it just becomes, I mean, more than interesting, because we already have established the prophetic significance of these events. But we just have these symbols that connect it to symbols that we had already attached to our history, which come from Josiah Litch's prophecy and from the prophecy of the 2300 days and so forth. So we have all of these connections. So all we do right now is we can affirm, well, we were correct in our understanding of the chronology. But the question is, why were we wrong about the event? And I don't think that we really answered that question. And I don't even think we asked it properly after November 9th. It was easy just to say that Parminder and Tess were wrong about their prediction. But the problem I had is I felt we were wrong. You know, how were we going to address that problem? So one of the ways that we addressed it, at least I addressed it, and I think others did as well, is that maybe this was a period of time from November 9th how somehow to July 18th, we were going to see this Russian conflict with the United States occur. And we had all kinds of ideas. You know, it would be some kind of, we had information war, we had, you know, some kind of EMP device that would happen. It would be some kind of computer attack on the United States. None of these things occurred. So the question is, why did we make that mistake? And what particularly was the mistake? And how do we now correct it? Or are we just going to continue making the same mistakes again and again? Because we obviously made a mistake in our understanding, in our interpretation of the events. But we keep getting witnesses that our chronology is correct. And this is the thing that bothers me, is and these witnesses that show us our chronology is correct, we could then try to say, well, this event is just delayed and we're going to look for this same event in the same way, just on a different date that's a part of our chronology. And the question I have is that consistent with what we see in the past?
I don't know that it's consistent with what we're seeing in the past. But it's possible.
Yeah. You know, because all through this history, I mean, it's not just the Millerites. Everybody's interested is what's happening with Turkey. Islam is a big issue. And it had been a big issue for a long time. Because Islam had really, it was in some ways the enemy. It was the enemy both to Catholicism, and mostly to Catholicism, but just also to the Christian world in general. Now, I mean, you see differences. England has a different relationship with Turkey to some degree than some of the countries because it's Protestant. I don't know if it sees Turkey or Islam as a religious threat, more as a military threat. And maybe that's true even of the Catholic countries. But you have the British Empire, which really stretches through lots of the world, including parts of the world that are predominantly Muslim.
Well, okay, I'm going to throw a point out
Okay.
that you might find interesting. We were addressing this with Pope Pius VI, right?
Yeah.
The day in which he was created a cardinal was 26th of April of 1773.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, so he also has that April 26th date attached to it. So he's made a cardinal 2 years before he's made pope. Because he becomes pope in 1775.
Right.
It's April 26th. So again, you have this date attached. And I don't see part of the problem I have. So when I look at how other people deal with chronology and with dates, people will look at something and they will see a date and they just say, well, it's significant because it's one of these dates. But you're seeing lots of dates all the time, every day. You're going to see lots of dates in different histories that you read. And the question is it significant? Is it connected? In order for it to be to be connected, it needs to be connected prophetically as part of a structure. And you know, because you might find lots of people who became, you know, different things. They're going to have birthdays on April 26th, or there's going to be lots of things happening on April 26th. Basically, one in every 365 and a quarter events that have ever occurred have occurred on April 26th. And you're looking at a lot of events. But when you can connect something like the Pope being ordained as a cardinal on April 26th, and then you're going to have him being made Pope on February 15th, a significant date that we already have prophetically that is going to mark the end of the 1260. Now, the other thing that's quite interesting here too is how long is it that Ellen White gives for that persecution has almost totally ceased prior to 1798. She's going to say about how long? She's going to give us an approximate date.
Isn't it about 25 years?
Yeah, about 25 years. And you can see that's basically about the time of Pope Pius VI. I mean, 25 years before 1798 or to 1798, he's going to be made cardinal. And then 23 years before his capture in 1798, he's going to be made Pope. And so you can see that 25 years really much aligns with Pope Pius VI. So Pope Pius VI is not involved in persecuting God's people. Because now it's almost wholly ceased, she says. So it's obviously there's some, but pretty much during that time, the papacy isn't persecuting God's people. But part of it is they have another enemy arising and things happening in the world. So you got events in France and events in the United States. And this is really what's changing the landscape. And this is going to bring about the end of the papacy for a time. Definitely the papacy's ability to control the nations around them. But you're going to see the beginning of this rise. I mean, some people would go to the Treaty of, starts with an L, what's it called? You know, in where the Pope gets the Vatican. Everybody knows the name of it. Anyway, we have that treaty there with the papacy. But then you're going to see
The Lateran Treaty.
yeah, the Lateran Treaty. Yeah. And then you're going to have, of course, Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II. And that's where the popularity of the Pope to non-Catholics is really going to be seen. He's going to be a very, very popular Pope. I mean, he even comes to Edmonton. And, you know, so that's pretty bizarre to see a Pope come to some place like Edmonton. And of course, Edmonton is not a Catholic city, but yet, you know, it became almost Catholic when the Pope was here. And then you have this, you know, what we see happening with, you know, Pope Francis. And we just see this progression. And you can see back looking at 1999, you know, when we were studying Notebook 1 from 98 to 99. You know, they're seeing that the Sunday law is coming because of what's happening with the papacy. I mean, the papacy's, its deadly wound appears as if it's about to be really healed. But we have this attack that happens by Islam. So Islam has this role at 9/11. And one thing we've noted is you can't take away that role of Islam. You can't say that it was an inside job and it was just, Islam was just blamed for it. And why can't we do that? You know, if you take the idea that it's an inside job and Islam just becomes a scapegoat, what happens prophetically with that sort of argument? How does that undo our message, I guess is the question.
Well, as Elder Daniel had pointed out, it sets aside the role of Islam as we've seen it on the charts.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it also, it removes the prophetic significance altogether.
Yeah, and if we look back at this history, I mean, this is Islam. You're not going to argue that Islam isn't involved in the Russo-Turkish War, or that the Marines aren't fighting Islam on the Barbary Coast. And so we don't have some pretend Islam, you know, being treated historically. We don't have this, we don't have anything like 9/11 that's an inside job in order to initiate a war with Islam. Plus, we already have a war with Islam prior to 9/11. So the war with Islam didn't become, I mean, Islam attacked the World Trade Center on February 26, 1993. I mean, I don't know of anyone who tries to say that wasn't Islam, that it was somehow an inside job. But, you know, if they had put that van of explosives 30 yards over, 30 feet, I can't remember, the North Tower would have fallen into the South Tower. That would have happened. They just put the van in the wrong location. And they had the location prepared, but it wasn't available. So the person decided to park the van in a different location and made a mistake from their point of view. But they're going to then make a plan to take down the World Trade Center. And it's well documented that they made this plan. So to try to argue it's an inside job, I think there's lots of problems with it. But I think the biggest argument is that prophetically, when we look at what we're looking at, if we're going to be looking at Islam and trying to see political significance.
Well,
then
okay.
What's that?
I just looked at something using, I think you would call that inclusive reasoning. We were addressing earlier that Berthier came into Rome and declared a Roman Republic on the 10th of February of 1798, correct?
Yeah,
The Lateran Treaty that you were just referring to was signed February 11th, 1929. So we're talking 52,000 days after Berthier declares the Roman Republic. Then Italy gives the Lateran Treaty to the Pope.
okay. Well, that's interesting. A pretty round number. Also Stephen's birthday, by the way.
Okay.
So we have, so we have all of these prophetic things. My point is that these are connected. We have things connected to Islam. We have symbols connected to Islam. And these are Islam. And then we're going to have the events of 9/11. And we can definitely connect 9/11 to Islam, not just to a restraint of Islam. Jeff would try to argue, at least if we have the restraint, you can hold on to your conspiracy theories regarding the inside job. But let's at least admit that there is a restraint of Islam. And that sort of appeased the people who believed it was an inside job. But my concern way back then is that when we use the type of reasoning that we have with conspiracy theories, that there is no objective reality in which we can discern what is true and what is not true. That is, you can make almost anything true if it can't be proven to be false. If you have no method of falsifiability, that is, if it can't be falsified, if you bring any evidence and any evidence against your conspiracy theory is then seen as part of the conspiracy theory, then that's a realm in which we can't enter, because that's not how God works. Everything can be verified. And I've had to deal with this in the area of chronology. There's people who just completely ignore all of the facts of chronology to create some kind of chronological scheme. My approach always has been that everything that I believe regarding chronology has to conform to the facts, to reality. I don't just dismiss something as a conspiracy to undermine the truth because it doesn't agree with some chronology I have. It has to agree with the facts. It has to be objectively true. And so if I can propose what I think a problem is, or a mistake that was made by this movement, I think one of the mistakes was to allow conspiracy theory thinking to influence our thinking, because it influenced how we interpreted events and how we interpreted dates. So my view, when we had this date, July 18, 2020, and I made suggestions, well, this means it's an attack on the United States by Islam, because that's what we were looking for. And if you're going to take a date and try to find, you're going to take an event and you're going to try to find a date for that event, July 18th seemed the most likely date. But the problem there, in my assumption, is that we were correct about how we were unfolding this line. And we can look back and say, well, it was obviously not unfolded. It was unfolding for us internally, but we were looking at it externally, and we shouldn't have done that. And we should have known this, but we were blinded by our presuppositions. So the mistake that we make, or the mistake that we made and that we can still make again, is we can do the same thing. We need to understand how Miller studied, and we need to apply his rules to this study. And that's why I ask the questions like, am I being presumptuous? Am I reading into these dates? Well, we can see that we're not, because if we apply Miller's rules, first off, we already have prophetic significance for these events. And the fact that these dates show up in very clear ways with these events, we can't just take as happenstance. But if you're going to look at just things happening around in the world, and something happens on a certain date or whatever, it has to be anchored prophetically and in solid ways in order for us to understand it. And that's what that whole thing was about with November 22nd. It would be easy to guess at what was going to happen on November 22nd. Even if we understood the symbols correctly, we don't have a way to know what the event is going to be. That is, those symbols are symbols, they symbolize something. But as far as what kind of event is going to match those symbols, that's a completely different thing. You know, and the question is, even after the fact, we have a difference of interpretation regarding that event. Jeff interprets November 22nd and that Thanksgiving differently than I do. I still maintain my interpretation is completely valid. The restraining and the loosening of Trump's hand in regard to the border of between United States and Mexico is definitely a symbol of the North and the South. And that Trump is there symbolized by what happens in Jeroboam. But what we see with Jeroboam then and Trump is we see this connection. But we're wrong to try to interpret then the events, because we believe Trump's the last president. And I still maintain that was a correct understanding given us by God. So Trump's the last president of the Republicans, the Republican Party, in its before it's given over to the globalists, before the United States is given to the globalists. And I would say, if I'm going to give a date and mark Raphael, I would mark January 6th as Raphael. Am I wrong to do that? Or is that a correct interpretation? Am I following Miller's rules when I look at January 6th as Raphael?
I would have to think that you are.
Okay. Now, the other thing about it is we can see that our idea of Raphael as being a battle between the United States and the Soviet Union is wrong, but it is a battle between the Democrats and the Republicans. And it's a civil war battle because we already used the Civil War as a type. Now, remember when we were going back and we were studying Josiah Litch's prophecy, and we were dealing with why they interpreted the events regarding Daniel 11 verse 36 to 45 in the way that they did, is that they were taking events that were symbolized by the King of the North and the King of the South. But now the King of the North and the King of the South are not literal King of the North and the King of the South. They're symbolic, they're spiritual. And the way that I pointed it out is that, we talked about before the cross literal, after the cross spiritual, right?
Right.
In this case, it has to do with the cross there is 538. That is, it has to do with this counterfeit week of Christ. And so we know that after 538, we're not dealing with literal, we're dealing with spiritual. And so France is now not going to be, this new power that's going to initiate a battle between the King of the North and the King of the South, Egypt and Turkey. France is going to become the king of itself, the South itself, because we already seen the transition from the King of the North being the nation of that has conquered the North, and that in this case is Rome, to now being the spiritual king of the North, the papacy. And so we have this whole spiritual significance, what the King of the North means, who the true King of the North is. All of these things come to play. So so when we were trying to make the application that we were, I think that we were making the same mistake that the Millerites made, and that we shouldn't have seen Russia as playing a role after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989. That was us continuing to force an interpretation upon events, trying to figure it out. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe Russia does have some role, but what people are doing is they're saying, well, maybe we're going to move it to China, right? But I think that's just some of the same sort of thinking. But when we move it to the Democrats, what are we doing that's consistent with Miller's rules?
Isn't this keeping it in the context of the Civil War?
Okay, so it's keeping into the context of the Civil War. But if we're following Miller's rules, what rule is it that we're following? What is it that we're recognizing in how we interpret? Because this is about interpretation of Scripture. And I would say it's rule 6. God has revealed things to come by visions and figures and parables. And in this way, the same things are oftentimes revealed again and again by different visions or in different figures and parables. If you wish to understand them, you must combine them all in one. So what has this movement done in fulfilling this rule that guides us? Is it not the combining of these lines?
Right.
Right. So all these lines that come together, the effect of every vision. And when people just take lines out of themselves, by themselves, out of context, and don't compare them, then they're going to be misled. And we have the new movement really doing some sleight of hand to make it look like they were following the lines, but they were completely messing up the lines, right? Because, Parminder was just cutting them into pieces and then putting them back together, sort of randomly. And there was no rhyme or reason to what he was doing. And
okay.
Yeah.
Earlier we were addressing 23-year periods, right?
Yeah.
So we dealt with 1775 to 1798.
Yeah.
And what was the other 23-year period that we used?
Well, we're looking at the period dealing with the 23-year period, you mean?
Yeah.
The 23-year period you had pointed out dealing with the Marines. What was it? It had to do with, what was the 23-year period you noted? I can't remember that. Oh, actually having to do with from 1805 to 1828.
Okay, now.
Yeah.
But in our own history, is there not a very significant 23-year period? And I'm speaking from August 11, 1840 to 1863.
Okay, yeah. So that ties it again, these periods of 23 years. It ties together Islam and what? Because what would be the significance of August 11th, 1840 to 1863?
Well, we had the validation of prophecy by August 11th, 1840.
Yeah.
And by 1863, we had a church that was choosing to set aside prophecy and was beginning to go more into Laodicea.
And then you have the 1863 chart, though. It
Right.
is the image of jealousy, but it also is God's witness against the church in rejecting these truths, because it hides on the chart the 25-20 and the prophetic mirror
Right.
in the week of Christ. And in the same place on the chart as you have the 25-20 calculation. So it's putting that in that same place. It's, you know, God's trying to remind us of our past in 1863. So anyway, you can see that this study is not easy this week, you know, to try to look at this, because, and I'm trying to figure out how to pull it together. I did a lot of reading, and all I got was, there's just a lot of information here. How do I make this accessible to people? And I think these periods of years and these spans of times, because what I'm going to try to do is to be able to draw this out tomorrow or maybe the next day, and try to see what kind of structure we have and how we can tie this to our present time. And this might take a bit, but I don't think that we can, because I still think that what this movement has to come to understand is not just July 18th, but it has to come to understand Raphi and Panium, what they actually mean.
I would agree.
Yeah. Okay, so let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are very thankful, Lord, for the time that we have had in studying through these things. We know, Lord, that there's much that we, again, don't understand. And we can see glimpses here that you are showing us in our past. Help us to understand this solid foundation. Help us to apply it to our present time. And we pray, Lord, that this movement can come to understand these truths, these things, that difficult things that we are struggling with. And thank you for hearing our prayer. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.